In practice, there were two different types of music, formal and informal. The only difference, of course, is that formal music wears tuxes. Don't quote me on that. Formal music was Ya Yua, the music of the royal courts. Informal was everything else. Formal music was considered correct, and informal music was considered vulgar, and most of the writings on it are written with some level of contempt. So we don't have much in the way of writing on informal music, and what we do have is probably biased in a really bad way. This is also true of the writing on the music of the Shang Dynasty, which wasn't even recorded until the Han Dynasty over 1,000 years later. Writings from the time of the Han Dynasty suggest that music of the Shang Dynasty was based on cultural excesses, such as heavy drinking or sexual debauchery. However, this being written 1,000 years after the fact means that it probably does not accurately reflect reality. And indeed, Han scholars may have in fact been trying to paint this period in a negative light to prove that the Shang Dynasty had lost the mandate of heaven. With two different types of music, it's no surprise that we have two different types of musicians as well. The court musicians were specifically trained in playing formal music. They played in official royal ceremonies, as well as other ceremonies and meetings of the state. As we saw with both Mesopotamia and Egypt, these musicians were very highly regarded. And we've made it to a point in music history where we have actual names of musicians. Shi Kong was a master of music in the 6th century BC. In regards to music, it was said that there was nothing that he didn't know. And apparently he was pretty good at predicting future events such as the outcomes of battles. So, probably don't want to invite him to your fantasy football league. Just a thought. He was a player of the qin, which is a stringed musical instrument. He was also blind. Many of the recorded musicians in the ancient world were blind. Ancient cultures believed that blind musicians had finer listening skills and were therefore preferable to musicians with sight. Of course, many musicians over the century have been blind, such as J.S. Bach at the end of his life, Ray Charles, Stevie Wonder, and that one Muppet from Electric Mayhem. However, both the royals and the public tended to prefer informal music, with one Zhou prince even saying that with formal music he always falls asleep, but with informal music he never gets tired. These informal musicians played for just about anything that wasn't an official state ceremony. This could include festivals, but it would also include less formal events for the nobles. However, the life of an informal musician was not exactly rock star status. Wealthy elites often owned full orchestras of musicians, with most of them being women. And to be clear, most of these musicians were slaves. One story mentions a head of state that employed Confucius, who was so enraptured by his orchestra that he neglected matters of the state for 3 days. This led Confucius to resign. It also led Confucius to believe that women are nothing but a distraction to the matters of the state. Some later Confucian thinkers would hold the belief that only men could be employed as court musicians. Some Zhou period writings suggest that male musicians would become animals in the presence of female musicians, and therefore men and women did not perform music together as such, and therefore men and women were given very different musical roles. In general, female musicians had very little autonomy, and were socially attached to a man for advancement. This was true for the lower classes as well as the royals. Life for a noble female musician may have been slightly better, but she was still attached to a noble man. This is in stark contrast to the low-class musicians who were essentially slaves. Advancement was difficult, if not virtually impossible. Just as easily as a female musician could advance based on beauty or talent, she could also be replaced if that beauty or talent faded. Male musicians did not fare much better. Most low-class male musicians were treated poorly as, again, they were essentially slaves in this feudalistic society. Ideally, they would want to advance to be able to play as a court musician, however very few did. Most court musicians were born elite and were therefore afforded musical training. It's also mostly these elite court musicians that we have record of. If we jump all the way down to the 5th century BC, we have what's known as the Warring States period. The Zhou was no longer military dominant. By 403, the Zhou had recognized at least 3 other independent states. Bad idea number 1. Duke Hui of the Wei declared himself to be king. Bad idea number 2. That started a chain reaction of other states no longer pretending to be vassal states of the Zhou, but rather independent kingdoms. Within just a few decades, there were over 100 regionalized governments. And just as the Zhou were reconsidering all of their life choices, the Qin murdered the last Zhou king. But their power was so weak at this point that China hardly noticed their demise. And even though it was the Qin who conquered the last of the Zhou, one Qin king noted the disruption in the order of heaven and earth with one document saying, "Nowadays, the house of Zhou has been destroyed, and the line of the sons of heaven has been severed. There is no greater turmoil than the absence of the son of heaven. Without the Son of Heaven, the strong overcome the weak, the many lord it over the few, and they use arms to harm each other, having no rest." These 100 regional governments were eventually conquered and consolidated down to 7 major states. These 7 were all vying for control of a unified China. Yet, despite all of these wars over 260 years, agriculture, philosophy, and the arts all flourished, although their tone changed quite drastically. And in 221 BC, the Qin finally unified China again, ending the Warring States period. The first Qin king officially declared himself the first emperor of a unified China, and with it, assumed the role of the War of Heaven. The Warring States period wasn't all bad for China in general. Side effects include need for better weapons, improved metalworking, the need to feed soldiers led to improvements in agriculture, and the desire to be protected led to the rise of cities that had fortifications, which also led to improvements in architecture. A currency was developed in the form of bronze coins, and a new line of writers and poets re-examined every aspect of a culture that had constantly been at war. The Qin ruled very differently from their Zhou predecessors. In a stark contrast to Confucianism, the Qin adopted legalism. This, in essence, says that man is naturally inclined to do wrong. And I suppose that is a logical conclusion after 200 straight years of war. Although I'm sure we'll never make that mistake again. In 213 BC, they had a good old-fashioned book burning, known to history as, get this, the burning of the books, in which they burned books that didn't support legalist philosophy. This included a good number of manuscripts on music. Burning books on music is particularly bad for music history, although I'm sure we'll never make that mistake again. This book burning also claimed the earliest known treatise on music theory, which dates to 320 BC. So the earliest treatise we have on music is from the Tang Dynasty, about 1,000 years later in the 7th century. However, due to adherence to tradition, it's possible that this treatise is still similar to the ancient style. And as a surprise to absolutely no one, the heavy-handed ruling of the Qin got them kicked out after a whopping 15 years. A rebellion was spurred, and this led to the rise of the Han Dynasty, which became a period of great advancement in music theory. Each note, and in particular each timbre, was a certain emotion. So, with an infinite number of pitches paired with the different instruments they could be played on, the importance of a single note cannot be overstated. A single sustained pitch was particularly important, as records show that nobles could sit there and listen to a sustained pitch for hours at a time, which tells me that Lamont Young is about 3,000 years behind. And with that, I'm starting to feel like the theory jokes around here are getting a little too nuanced. China is really the first civilization that puts such a high emphasis on timbre. This is in great contrast to Western music, in which Bach's Art of the Fugue doesn't even specify which instruments it's for. Instruments were classified by the material they were made of rather than how they made sound. There were 8 classifying materials: stone, metal, silk, bamboo, wood, clay, gourd, and skin. Perhaps the most influential discovery on music in this period comes from the tomb of Marquis Yi, and the discovery of a set of 64 metal bells mounted on a metal framework. The bells spanned 5 octaves and would take as many as 5 percussionists to play. They were played with wooden mallets and produced 2 separate pitches at the center and on the side thanks to their oblong shape. These bells are about 2,500 to 3,000 years old, but are still fully playable. And yet here I have a collection of dead laptops that didn't last for but about 4 years. Thanks, Dell. The 2 notes on each bell were a major third apart. This allowed for the full chromatic 12 notes, as well as for melodic and harmonic playing. We aren't entirely sure when the 5-note scale was settled upon, but probably during the latter half of the Zhou Dynasty, during a period known as the Spring and Autumn period. There was also a 7-note scale in use at the time, but it's clear that the pentatonic scale had the spotlight. According to mythology, Ling Lun created a set of bamboo flutes that produced the sounds of birds, including the phoenix. These flutes produced scale degrees 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6, giving the creation of the pentatonic scale. These pitches were then immortalized by the Yellow Emperor, who made those pitches in a casting of metal bells. While this story has a 99% chance of being made up, the concept of a non-standard pitch being made from bamboo and then becoming fixed by metallic bells is an important one. The scale was derived from a series of 2 to 3 ratios, representing heaven and earth respectively. In a system of balance, binary opposites were very important. Heaven and earth, male and female, yin and yang. So in the circle of fifths, calculations would begin at a certain center note. I'll use C for this example because the graphic that I already had made started on C. The ratio would be a multiple 3 to 2 going in one direction for 6 notes, and then divided 3 to 2 going in the other direction 6 notes. This led to a set of 6 notes being considered masculine and their complementary set being considered feminine. From those 12 notes, 5 could be taken to create a scale. The tuning was not a fixed pitch, but could move based on a fundamental pitch, known as gong. So naturally, if the pitch was on a set of bells, that pitch was pretty much fixed. But if you're working with pipes, then the fundamental pitch would be created from one pipe, and then all of the other pipes would be tuned from that first one. So if we have a pipe that is sounding note C, which is a certain length, and we mark that pipe into even thirds, we can create a G note by taking a second pipe, which is 2/3 as long. Then, D natural can be made by making a pipe that is 4/3 the length of the G pipe. And then A by making a pipe that is 2/3 the length of the D pipe. This eventually creates a full 12-note set of pipes. However, as Pythagoras and countless Western music theorists after him can tell you, this will leave your octave about 24 cents off. So next time we will look at the fascinating journey that China took to arrive at equal temperament. Spoiler alert, they beat the West by over 100 years. Thanks for watching this episode of Music and History. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. And if you like this video, please share it with your friends. Also be sure to follow @2MinuteMusic on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you're a musicologist who'd like to collaborate, please send me a direct message. I'd love to work with you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.